The afternoon sun hung lazily over the highway, the kind of golden light that made the air shimmer. Two sisters sat quietly in their car, the steady hum of the road beneath them. It had been a long week, long months really, working undercover for a case that demanded everything from them. Finally, they were heading home, their minds set on rest, peace, and maybe a good night's sleep for the first time in weeks. Both women looked alike in every way, not just because they were twins, but because years of working together had given them the same steady focus, the same calmness under pressure. They didn't speak much as they drove. Words weren't needed. They had that unspoken understanding that only twins, and partners who had been through countless dangers together, could share. The radio played softly in the background, an old soul song that filled the car with warmth. The younger twin, though only by a few minutes, smiled faintly. "Feels good to just drive," she said, glancing out the window at the open fields. Her sister nodded. No disguises, no fake names, just us. They both laughed quietly, but there was relief behind it. They had spent months pretending to be people they weren't, blending into worlds that demanded silence and courage. And now, for once, they were just themselves. Two women on a quiet drive home. As the car moved through a small town, the traffic light ahead turned yellow. They slowed to a stop. A police cruiser was parked on the side of the road. The officer inside looked up, his gaze following their car as it came to a halt. At first, neither of the sisters paid much attention. They had nothing to hide after all. But when the cruiser pulled out behind them, flashing its lights, they exchanged a quick look. "Maybe he's just doing a random check," one said quietly. "Yeah," her sister replied. "Stay calm. We'll be fine." They pulled over to the shoulder, rolled down the window, and waited. The officer approached slowly, his hand resting on his belt, his expression unreadable. The older twin offered a polite smile. "Good afternoon, officer. Is there a problem?" Months had passed since the day everything changed. The story of the twins and the officer had faded from the public's mind, but its echo still moved through quiet corners and in conversations in classrooms and in police stations where people began to think a little more before reacting. The twins had returned to their regular field work. They lived a quieter life now, less interested in headlines and more focused on the kind of impact that didn't always get noticed. Their names weren't in the news anymore, and that was how they liked it. But their story continued to inspire. One late afternoon, as they sat in the small cafe near their office, the younger twin looked out the window and said softly, "It's strange how peaceful things feel now." Her sister smiled faintly. "That's how it's supposed to be. Change doesn't always make noise." The cafe was half empty, filled with the gentle hum of quiet chatter and clinking cups. Outside, the streets glowed with the golden light of sunset. Everything felt still, but beneath that calm was the quiet satisfaction of having survived something bigger than themselves and turning it into something good. As they sipped their coffee, their phones buzzed almost at the same time. It was an email from the bureau's director. The message was short. "There's an event next week honoring agents for exceptional service. Both of you are requested to attend." The younger twin raised an eyebrow. "Do you think it's about the training program?" Her sister nodded slowly. "Probably, but I think there's more to it." The following week, they arrived at the bureau's main hall. Rows of chairs filled the room, and the air carried that familiar mix of formality and quiet pride. The event was meant to recognize those who had gone beyond the call of duty, people who had represented the agency's values not just through their work, but through their character. When their names were called, the twins stood up side by side as always. They weren't used to public praise, but as they walked to the front, the applause that rose around them felt honest, not loud, but warm and meaningful. The director handed them a small plaque. "For representing courage, restraint, and dignity in the face of injustice," he said. "And for reminding us that true strength often speaks the quietest." They thanked him and stepped aside. Cameras flashed, people clapped again, and yet both sisters felt something beyond pride, a sense of peace, as if a circle had quietly closed. After the ceremony, a few agents came up to speak with them. One young man said, "Because of you, I've started to think differently about how I talk to people on the job. You made me realize it's not about control, it's about respect." The twins smiled. That was exactly what they'd hoped their story would do. Not to create noise, but to plant something in others that would keep growing long after they were gone. Later that night, they stood outside the bureau building, watching the city lights flicker across the skyline. "Do you think we made a difference?" the younger twin asked. Her sister looked thoughtful. "Maybe not in the whole world, but maybe in someone's world, and that's enough." They walked back to their car, but as they reached the parking lot, a familiar voice called out from behind them. "Excuse me," they turned. It was the same officer, the one who had smashed the car window months ago. He looked different now. There was no harshness in his face, no tension in his posture. He held a small envelope in his hand. "I hope it's all right that I came," he said quietly. "I didn't know where else to find you." The twins exchanged a quick look, then nodded. The older one said calmly, "Of course. What brings you here?" He took a slow breath. "I've been doing a lot of thinking these past months. I've gone through every kind of training they offered, but honestly, none of it meant as much as that day, or what came after. You didn't yell. You didn't fight. You just stayed calm. That taught me something that no class ever could." He held out the envelope. "I wrote something for you, a letter. I didn't want to send it through the bureau. It felt personal." The older twin took the envelope gently but didn't open it right away. "Thank you," she said simply. He nodded. "I'm not here for forgiveness. I don't deserve that. But I wanted to tell you that because of you, I've started working with the youth program downtown, trying to help kids understand their rights, and trying to help officers understand respect. I thought maybe that's how I can start to fix what I broke." The younger twin spoke softly. "That's a good start. Real change takes time, but you're trying, and that means something." He smiled faintly, almost with relief. "Thank you. I just wanted you to know that what you did that day, it mattered." He nodded once more, then turned and walked away. The twins watched him go, neither speaking for a moment. Finally, the older twin said quietly, "People can change. Sometimes they just need to see what grace looks like." Her sister nodded, and maybe that's the point of all this. When they got home that night, they sat down on the couch together and opened the letter. Inside, written in careful handwriting, were the officer's words. "I will never forget the day I looked into your eyes and realized what respect really means. I thought authority came from a badge. I was wrong. Real authority comes from character, from patience, humility, and grace. Thank you for teaching me that, even when I didn't deserve it." They both read it silently, and when they finished, they sat for a long time without saying anything. The letter wasn't an apology. It was something deeper, an acknowledgement of growth, of learning, of becoming human again. A few days later, they returned to work as usual. Their next assignment took them to a nearby town, a small place with quiet streets and friendly faces. They spent most of their days blending in, gathering information, doing what they did best, working in silence and letting results speak for themselves. Yet, every so often something reminded them of that day. The sound of a police radio, the sight of a patrol car passing by, the faint crack of glass somewhere in the distance. But now those sounds didn't stir anger. They reminded them of how far they had come, and how much good could grow from something painful. One evening, as they finished another long day and watched the sun set over the hills, the younger twin said quietly, "Do you think people will remember what really happened?" The older one smiled softly. "Maybe, but even if they don't, it's okay. We didn't do it for them to remember. We did it because it was right." Her sister nodded slowly. "Right, that's enough." The next morning, they drove out early for a new case. The road stretched out before them, calm and open. The dawn sky painted in soft colors. The world seemed peaceful again. Maybe not perfect, but better. And somewhere in the same city they had left behind, the officer stood before a group of kids in a community center. He held up a photo of two women, not their faces, just their silhouettes standing side by side. "These two," he told the kids, "reminded me that strength isn't about power. It's about control and respect, and that's something you show to everyone, no matter who they are." He didn't tell the full story. He didn't need to. The kids listened quietly, their eyes fixed on him, understanding that what he said came from experience. The twins would never know how far their influence reached, but that was the beauty of it. Real change doesn't announce itself. It moves quietly from one heart to another, until it becomes something bigger than any one story. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon that evening, The twins had reached their destination. They parked by a quiet roadside diner, laughing softly. About nothing in particular. For the first time in a long while, they felt completely at peace. The older twin looked out the window at the fading light and said, almost to herself, "Funny how life works, isn't it? Sometimes the hardest moments lead to the most meaningful ones." Her sister smiled. "Yeah, maybe that's how we keep moving forward and one lesson at a time." And with that, they clinked their coffee mugs together, their laughter blending with the sound of the wind outside. Two women who had faced injustice and turned it into something unbreakable. Quiet strength, unspoken forgiveness, and the lasting power of calm courage. He didn't smile back. His eyes darted from her face to the inside of the car, scanning quickly. "License and registration," he said sharply. She handed them over without hesitation. "Of course." He glanced at the documents but didn't seem to read them. "Where are you two headed?" "Home," she answered evenly. "We've been traveling for work." "What kind of work?" he asked, his tone colder now. The younger twin shifted slightly, keeping her hands visible. "We're consultants," she said carefully. "Just finished a long project." The officer studied them with suspicion, his brows furrowed. "Consultants," he repeated slowly, as if testing the word. "You know, I've seen this kind of car before. Usually driven by people up to something." The older twin frowned, confused but calm. "Excuse me, sir?" He leaned closer, peering through the window. "Mind stepping out of the car for me?" There was no reason to. They hadn't broken any laws, and the stop had no clear cause. Still, both women knew better than to argue. They had dealt with far worse during their undercover operations, but this was different. This wasn't part of a case. This was their real life. The older twin spoke softly. "Officer, is there something specific we did wrong?" His jaw tightened. "Don't question me. Step out now." For a moment there was silence. The sound of passing cars filled the space between them. The younger twin gave her sister a quick look, one that said, "Stay calm." They had spent years training for moments where control meant survival. Even here, even now, that training took over. The older twin nodded slowly. "All right, officer. We'll cooperate." She opened the door carefully and stepped out, her hands visible. The younger sister stayed seated, watching quietly. The officer circled the car, glancing inside. "What's in the trunk?" he demanded. "Just luggage," she replied calmly. "We've been traveling." He didn't seem satisfied. "Pop it open." She pressed the trunk button and he walked back to check. Inside were 2 suitcases, neatly packed, and a small black duffel. Nothing suspicious, nothing out of place. Still, his tone carried accusation rather than reason. "You said you're consultants. For who?" The younger twin leaned slightly out the window. "Federal Department," she said, her voice even. "We handle security work." That should have been the end of it. But the officer's tone grew sharper. "Federal, huh? You two think you're above the law?" Her sister's patience was thinning, but she stayed composed. "No, sir. We respect the law. We just expect the same in return." The officer's eyes hardened. "Get out of the car. Both of you." There was no reason for this to escalate, but the twins knew that pushing back could make it worse. So the younger twin opened her door and stepped out, slowly, carefully. As she stood beside her sister, she whispered under her breath, "Don't say a word. Let him finish." The officer circled them again, glancing at their car, then back at them. "You got any weapons, drugs? Anything you shouldn't have?" "No, sir," they both said at once. He paused, staring. Something in his expression shifted, a mixture of arrogance and suspicion that had nothing to do with the law. The older twin took a quiet breath. "Officer, we've given you our documents, answered your questions, and cooperated fully. Is there something else you need?" For a moment, he didn't reply. Then he muttered something under his breath and walked back toward his cruiser, radioing someone. The twins stood there silently. The sun beat down on their faces and cars slowed as they passed, curious. The younger twin's heart beat faster now, not from fear but frustration. "He's calling backup," she murmured quietly. "I know," her sister replied. "Stay calm. Don't break cover." She hesitated before continuing. "Should we alert the bureau?" "Not yet," the older one said softly. "Let's see where this goes." A few minutes later, the officer returned. His tone was more aggressive now. "You two acting nervous for a reason? You hiding something in this car?" The younger twin folded her arms gently. We're not hiding anything, sir. We've complied with everything you asked. He stepped closer, his voice rising slightly. You think I can't tell when someone's lying? The older twin met his eyes calmly. We're not lying. Something in that calmness seemed to bother him more than any argument could have. He gestured sharply toward the car. Hands on the hood. They froze for half a second. It wasn't a command they were used to hearing, especially when they'd done nothing wrong, but they did as told. Not out of fear, but out of discipline. As they placed their hands on the car, the younger twin caught her sister's eye and gave the smallest nod. Her sister understood immediately, and a signal. Inside her pocket she had a phone. Not just any phone. A secure bureau device disguised as an ordinary one. With a quick, subtle movement, she pressed a small button on its side. It sent an automatic alert to their field office, a safety protocol they both knew well. The officer walked around the car, glancing at their license again. Funny, he muttered. You say you're federal workers, but I've never seen anyone like you in that kind of job. The word stung, not because they were new, but because they were familiar, the kind of assumption they'd spent their lives proving wrong. The older twin didn't respond. She stood still, breathing evenly, the sunlight reflecting off the car's surface. A few moments later, the faint sound of engines echoed in the distance. The officer turned his head slightly, frowning. 3 black SUVs appeared at the end of the road, moving in formation. Their tinted windows and quiet power made it clear they weren't ordinary vehicles. The officer stepped back, confused. What the? The twins didn't move. They stayed silent, composed, letting the moment unfold. The SUVs pulled up behind the police car. The doors opened and several well-dressed federal agents stepped out, their badges visible. One of them walked straight toward the officer, his face calm but firm. The man stopped in front of him. Is there a reason you're detaining 2 of my agents? The officer blinked, startled. You're what? Agents, the man repeated evenly. Federal Bureau of Investigation. You've interfered with an active undercover operation. The officer's face drained of color. He turned slowly toward the twins, who were still standing by their car, quiet and steady. They didn't look angry. They didn't even speak. Their silence said everything. The drive back to headquarters was quiet. The twins sat in the back seat of the SUV, both staring out opposite windows. The highway rolled beneath them, the sound of tires humming like a soft reminder that they were no longer undercover, at least not for now. The older twin finally broke the silence. I didn't think it would happen like that. Her sister sighed. Neither did I, but it did. They both knew what she meant. It wasn't just about being stopped by that officer. It was about the feeling behind it. The tone. The suspicion that came from nowhere. They had faced dangerous criminals, handled life-or-death missions, and worked under the radar for years. Yet this, a simple traffic stop, had left them feeling smaller than they should. The SUV turned off the main road and into a quiet side street leading to a secure building. The driver, another agent they'd worked with before, kept his eyes on the road. You 2 handled that better than most people would, he said after a while. You stayed calm. The younger twin gave a half smile. We've had practice. But her voice carried a tiredness that no joke could hide. When they reached the building, a tall man in a dark suit was waiting outside. He was their division supervisor, the kind of person who never wasted words but whose presence filled every room he entered. As the twins stepped out, he nodded once. You both all right? We're fine, the older twin replied. He studied their faces. Let's talk inside. They followed him through security and into a glass-walled conference room. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of the air conditioning. The supervisor gestured for them to sit. Do you know what kind of mess that officer just walked into? He asked, his voice calm but serious. We didn't plan for it, the younger twin said. We didn't even want him to know who we were. I know, he replied. But the minute you pressed that distress button, the system activated. The Bureau had to respond. Now we've got a public incident to handle. The older twin nodded slowly. We understand. He looked at them for a moment longer, then his tone softened. You both did the right thing. You stayed calm, didn't escalate, and you didn't reveal your positions. That's exactly what you're trained to do, still. It shouldn't have come to that. There was silence again. The younger twin leaned back slightly, staring at the table. You'd think people would see the badge before they see anything else. Her sister glanced at her, then at their supervisor. "It's not the first time we've dealt with assumptions. But this one hit harder," he nodded. "I understand." Then, after a pause, he added, "There's going to be an inquiry. The local department already reached out after realizing who you were. I'll handle it from here, but I want you both to take a couple of days off. You've been running nonstop for months, and now this." They didn't argue. Rest sounded like something they both desperately needed. When they left the building later that day, the air felt cooler, calmer. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in soft orange light. For a while, they just stood by the car, not saying anything. Finally, the younger twin spoke. "Do you think he'll get away with it?" Her sister shrugged. "That's not our call. It's above us now." But deep down, both knew that what happened wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a reflection of something larger, something they'd both faced before in smaller, quieter ways. They drove home in silence for a long time before the older twin reached over and turned on the radio again. The same song from earlier played, a familiar rhythm that made them both smile a little. "Same song," she said softly. "Maybe it's trying to tell us something," her sister replied, half smiling. They laughed quietly, but it wasn't the same carefree laugh from before. It was softer, heavier with thought. When they reached home, their apartment felt unusually quiet. The younger twin dropped her keys on the counter and sat on the couch. Her sister followed, sitting beside her. After a few minutes, the younger one said, "You ever get tired of pretending it doesn't bother you?" The older twin didn't answer right away. She leaned forward, elbows on her knees, staring at the floor. "All the time," she admitted. "But if I let it show every time, I'd never get anything done." Her sister nodded. "I know, still. It's hard, it is," she said softly. "But we're tougher than this. We always have been." That night, neither of them slept much. The scene replayed in their minds. The flashing lights, the officer's sharp tone, the way he had looked at them as if they didn't belong. The next morning, the bureau called again. Their supervisor wanted them to attend a briefing. Not for work. This time it was about what had happened. When they arrived, a small group of senior agents was already there. Some looked serious, others concerned. Their supervisor stood at the front of the room. "Ladies," he said, motioning for them to sit. "We've reviewed the footage. The officer's body camera captured everything. The good news is you both handled it perfectly. The bad news is it's already circulating within the department. Someone leaked it." The younger twin frowned. "Leaked to the press?" "Not yet," he said. "But it's spreading. People are talking." The older twin stayed quiet. She had expected something like this. Things like that didn't stay hidden for long. Their supervisor looked at them with quiet respect. "You didn't raise your voices, you didn't resist, and you followed every instruction. When the other units arrived, you didn't embarrass the officer. You let the situation speak for itself. That professionalism is what separates you from everyone else." They both nodded, though the words didn't make them feel better. The younger twin finally asked, "What's going to happen to him?" "There'll be an internal review," the supervisor replied, "and likely a public statement once the truth comes out. But again, we don't control that part." The older twin sat back. "Then we let it unfold. Maybe this time, someone will finally pay attention to the right lesson." The meeting ended quietly. As they walked out of the building, the younger twin spoke again. "Do you think people will actually believe the story?" Her sister smiled faintly. "Maybe not at first, but they'll see it. The truth has a way of showing up." That afternoon, they visited their parents, something they hadn't done in weeks. Their mother greeted them with hugs, unaware of the full story. She could tell something was off, though. "You both look tired," she said softly, brushing hair from their faces. "Just work," the older twin said, with a small smile. The next few days felt like a blur. The world seemed to spin faster than usual. The twins couldn't step outside without someone whispering or pointing at them. Their faces were never shown in the video, but the story had spread everywhere. Everyone knew about the two agents who had been stopped unfairly, and how calm they stayed through it all. They had spent years working quietly in the background, never craving attention, never wanting recognition. But now, they were part of a story that didn't need names or faces to make people listen. Early one morning, the older twin sat by the window, watching the sunlight spill across the kitchen counter. She held her coffee with both hands, lost in thought. Her sister walked in, still wearing a robe, hair pulled back in a loose bun. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked softly. The older one shook her head. "Not really. I kept thinking about how fast things change. One day no one knows us. The next everyone's talking about us." Her sister sat across from her. "It's strange, isn't it? We do undercover work for years, and the thing that puts us in the spotlight isn't even our case." They both smiled weakly at the irony. Their phones buzzed at the same time, a text from their supervisor. "Need you both at the office in 1 hour." They looked at each other. "Guess it's time," said the younger twin, standing up. When they arrived, the office felt heavier than usual. People greeted them with quiet respect, a mix of pride and sympathy in their eyes. No one needed to say what they were thinking. Their supervisor was waiting in his office. He looked tired, like he hadn't slept much either. "Come in," he said, motioning for them to sit. He leaned back in his chair. "The footage is out. It's on national news now. We've released a statement confirming your identities, but we're keeping your personal details confidential. Still, it's everywhere. Talk shows, podcasts, social media. Everyone's talking about the way you handled it." The older twin frowned. "We didn't want this kind of attention." "I know," he said calmly. "But it's not something we can control. What we can do is use it right. The Bureau wants to highlight it as an example of professionalism under pressure. They also want you to attend a press meeting this afternoon." The younger twin blinked. "You mean, speak publicly?" He nodded. "Just a short statement. Nothing about the investigation. Just something about how respect and restraint can change outcomes. Keep it simple, honest, and professional." They both hesitated. They were trained for danger, not for cameras. But after a moment, the older twin nodded. "If it helps people understand, we'll do it." "Good," their supervisor said. "The department that handled the stop has also issued an apology. There's a review in progress." The twins exchanged a quick look. "What about the officer?" the younger one asked quietly. "He's been placed on leave," the supervisor replied. "Internal Affairs is handling it. You don't need to worry about that part." The older twin nodded. "We just want fairness. Nothing more." He gave a small, respectful nod. "And that's exactly why people respect you too." That afternoon, they stood at a small podium in front of a quiet room filled with reporters. Cameras flashed softly, but the twins stayed calm. Their supervisor stood nearby, letting them take the lead. The older twin spoke first, her voice steady but kind. "We didn't come here today to point fingers or cause division. What happened was difficult, yes. But what matters most now is what we learn from it. Respect should be the starting point for every interaction, no matter who you are or where you come from." The younger twin stepped up next. "We've spent our careers working to make our communities safer. And that means safety for everyone, officers, citizens, and those who wear the badge. What we want is understanding. What we need is empathy." Their words were calm, thoughtful, and sincere. The room stayed quiet for a few seconds after they finished before the sound of applause slowly filled the air. Later that evening, clips from their speech spread online. People called them graceful, strong, and inspiring. Some said their composure reminded the world that strength doesn't always need to be loud. Meanwhile, in another part of town, the officer sat at home in silence. His television was on, showing the twins' press conference. His face was tense, eyes fixed on the screen. His wife stood nearby, not knowing what to say. He had been through hours of questioning. His department had suspended him pending the investigation, and every news outlet seemed to have an opinion. He wasn't used to being the one under the spotlight. When the twins' faces appeared on screen, he felt something he hadn't before. Shame. Not because of what he'd done to someone famous or powerful, but because he finally understood how wrong his judgment had been. His wife turned off the TV gently. "You should talk to someone," she said quietly. He didn't answer. He just sat there, hands clasped tightly, staring at the blank screen. Over the next week, the story continued to grow. Editorials, radio shows, and community leaders all discussed it. But the twins didn't do any more interviews. They returned to work quietly, focusing on their cases and trying to move forward. Still, people recognized them sometimes, at coffee shops, at the grocery store, in the elevator. Most were kind. They'd smile and say thank you or whisper words like, "You made us proud." It was strange being seen like that. One afternoon, their supervisor called them in again. "The Department of Justice wants to include your case in their annual report on law enforcement conduct," he said. "They'll cite it as an example of professionalism and self-control." The younger twin smiled faintly. "We didn't expect to make history this way." He smiled too. "Sometimes history doesn't ask permission. This chapter keeps the same tone, simple, deeply human, emotional, and engaging. It shows what happens after the apology, how the community reacts, what lessons are learned, and how the twins find strength in quiet change. Written in natural, flowing language, no violence, no strong words, only real emotion and human growth." About 1,400 words. Weeks passed after the meeting with the officer. The story had begun to fade from the headlines, but the lessons it carried still lingered quietly in people's hearts. The twins went back to work, though things weren't quite the same. They had always been respected within the bureau, but now there was something different, a quiet admiration, a new level of trust that hadn't been there before. Their colleagues looked at them with a kind of pride, as if what they had done reflected something bigger than just professionalism. They had become symbols of calm strength, though neither of them wanted that title. They just wanted to keep doing their jobs, serving people, and moving forward. One morning, their supervisor called them into his office again. "I've been contacted by the city council," he said as they took their seats. "They want you both to speak at a community event next week. It's about building trust between officers and citizens." The younger twin frowned slightly. "You mean, like a conference?" He nodded. "Yes, but it's open to the public. People from all walks of life will be there. Law enforcement, community leaders, families, students. They want real voices, people who've lived it." The older twin hesitated. "We're not public speakers." Her supervisor smiled faintly. "Maybe not, but you have something real to say, and people want to hear it. Don't think of it as a speech. Think of it as a conversation." They exchanged a look. Speaking in front of a crowd wasn't what they were trained for, but they both understood why it mattered. If their story could spark even a small change, maybe it was worth it. Over the next few days, they worked together to prepare. They didn't write formal speeches, just small notes, personal reflections. They wanted their words to sound natural, not rehearsed. They talked about respect, calmness under pressure, and how assumptions could shape moments in ways people didn't realize. When the day finally came, the hall was filled with people. The air buzzed with quiet energy. Local officers sat side by side with residents, teachers, and students. The mayor gave a brief introduction, then invited the twins to the stage. As they walked up, there was polite applause. Neither of them smiled too much. They weren't there for attention. They were there to connect. The older twin spoke first. Her voice was calm, steady, and real. "When we put on a uniform or carry a badge, we carry a responsibility, not just to enforce the law, but to respect it, in everyone we meet." She paused, looking around the room. "Respect isn't something we give only when it's easy. It's something we show even when we don't understand, even when fear or bias whispers in the back of our mind." The younger twin continued softly. "What happened to us wasn't about one person. It was about a system of misunderstanding that hurts both sides. We can't fix it overnight, but we can start by seeing each other as human first, before labels, before judgments." The room was silent. Their words weren't fancy or dramatic, but they came from the heart. After they finished, people stood and applauded, not in a loud, chaotic way, but in a long, meaningful one. Some officers in the crowd nodded quietly. Others wiped their eyes. Later, as they stepped off the stage, a young girl approached them. She looked about 16, wearing a simple denim jacket and a shy smile. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said softly. "I want to join the FBI one day. Seeing you both makes me believe I can." The twins smiled, touched. The older one said gently, "You can do anything if you lead with honesty. That's what really matters." That small moment stayed with them more than the applause did. After the event, they returned to their daily work, but word about their talk spread quickly. Local news outlets wrote about it, describing how the twins had turned a moment of injustice into one of healing. Some even called it the conversation that changed a town. Meanwhile, the officer who had wronged them attended his own kind of journey. The department required him to undergo special training sessions, not as punishment but as education. It wasn't easy for him. He faced whispers, judgment, and his own guilt. But something about that meeting with the twins had stayed in his mind. He began listening more during sessions, taking notes, reflecting quietly. One day, months later, he attended another community event. This time he wasn't there as an officer and just a citizen. He listened from the back of the room as the twins spoke again, this time as guest mentors for new recruits. He didn't approach them afterward. He just stood in silence, watching the respect they had earned not through authority but through grace. And for the first time in his life, he understood what leadership really meant. Back at the bureau, the twins' lives slowly returned to normal. Their next assignment took them to another city. They threw themselves into work, investigations, briefings, reports, but something inside them had shifted. They carried a deeper awareness now, not just of their duty, but of their impact. On their last night before leaving town, they went for a walk. The streets were quiet, the air cool and clean. Streetlights cast soft yellow circles on the pavement. "Do you ever think about how one moment changed everything?" the younger twin asked. Her sister nodded. "All the time. But maybe it needed to happen. Maybe that's how change begins. One uncomfortable moment at a time." They walked a little further before the younger one spoke again. "Do you ever wish it hadn't happened?" The older twin took a breath before answering. "Sometimes. But then I remember the girl who said we inspired her. The officers who came to listen. The people who started to talk instead of fight. Maybe it was meant to happen this way." Her sister smiled softly. "Maybe so." As they crossed the bridge leading back toward their apartment, the city lights shimmered on the water below. The world seemed peaceful, even if only for a moment. When they returned home, their phones buzzed with messages, people thanking them, strangers reaching out. Even officers from other states saying their story had opened eyes. They read a few, then set the phones aside. Neither wanted to get lost in attention. What mattered was the work, the message, the quiet progress being made. That weekend, the Bureau invited them to meet with a group of new recruits. It wasn't part of their job and it was voluntary, but they agreed. When they walked into the classroom, the young recruits straightened in their seats. One of the trainees asked nervously, "Ma'am, how did you stay so calm that day?" Most people would have reacted differently. The older twin smiled faintly. "Because we weren't there to win an argument. We were there to keep control of the moment. Anger burns fast. Calm lasts longer." The younger one added, "Every choice we make leaves a mark, on us and on others. Sometimes your quietest reaction can be your loudest message." The room stayed silent and the recruits nodded slowly, taking in every word. After the session, their supervisor found them in the hallway. "You two are doing something bigger than you think," he said. "You're not just teaching agents. You're reminding people what integrity looks like." They smiled modestly. "We're just doing our jobs." He shook his head gently. "No, you're doing more than that. You're rebuilding trust. One story at a time." That night the twins went home and sat on their balcony again, as they often did when they needed quiet. The city moved below them. Cars, laughter, bits of music drifting through the air. The older twin leaned back, gazing at the stars. "You know, it's funny. We've done dangerous missions, dealt with criminals, faced threats, but somehow that one moment on the road changed us more than all of it combined." Her sister nodded, because this time it wasn't about danger. It was about being seen and still choosing to be calm. The older one smiled softly. "Yeah, and maybe that's real strength." They sat in silence for a long while after that, not needing to say anything more. The world below them kept moving, the lights flickering like quiet reminders that life goes on, and that sometimes the most powerful change begins not with force, but with grace. And somewhere in that same city, the officer who once made the wrong choice began his own kind of change. Slower, quieter, but real. He had started volunteering at youth programs, talking to kids about respect and patience. He didn't do it for redemption. He did it because he finally understood what the twins had taught him, that being human first is the only way to truly serve others. The story that began with fear had become one of understanding. And the two women who never wanted the spotlight had unknowingly lit the path for others to follow. That night, the twins sat on their balcony again, watching the city below. The air was cool, carrying the sounds of distant traffic and the faint hum of nightlife. I keep thinking about him, the younger twin said softly. The officer, her sister, looked over. What about him? I wonder if he's really thinking about what happened. Or if he's just angry that he got caught. The older twin was quiet for a long moment. Maybe both. But that's not our burden. We did what we had to do, and with integrity. Her sister nodded. Yeah. Still, part of me hopes he learned something from it. He will, the older twin said softly. One way or another. The next day they received an unexpected message from their supervisor. The officer had requested to meet them privately, not for confrontation, but to apologize. At first they hesitated. It wasn't something they had planned for, but after a long talk they agreed. Not for him, but for them, see. To close the chapter properly. The meeting was set for the following week, in a neutral office space with a department representative present. When the day came, the twins walked into the room together. The officer stood at the far end, looking smaller than they remembered. His uniform was gone. He was dressed in plain clothes, eyes lowered. He looked up slowly. Thank you for agreeing to see me, he said, his voice low. They both nodded, saying nothing. He took a deep breath. I was wrong. I judged you before I knew anything about you. I made assumptions that I can't take back. And I'm sorry. The room stayed silent for a few seconds. The apology wasn't rehearsed. It sounded real, heavy with regret. The older twin finally spoke. We're not here for apologies, she said gently. We're here because we believe people can learn from their mistakes. The younger twin added softly, It's not about who's right or wrong. It's about what happens next. The officer nodded slowly. I understand. They talked for a while longer, not about the past, but about how things could be different. About training, empathy, and awareness. It wasn't an easy conversation, but it was honest. When they left, both sides felt lighter. It didn't erase what had happened, but it turned anger into understanding. As the twins walked out into the afternoon light, the older one smiled faintly. Maybe this was the real assignment, she said quietly. Her sister smiled back. Maybe it was. The next morning they returned to work. Another case, another day. But something inside them had shifted. The story that began with suspicion had turned into something much larger. A reminder that respect, calm, and patience could change even the hardest hearts. And though they didn't speak much about it anymore, the world hadn't forgotten. Somewhere in the city, posters hung on community boards with their quote from the press conference. Respect should be the starting point for every interaction, no matter who you are. It became more than words. It became a quiet promise, a reminder that even in the most ordinary moments, humanity could still rise above everything else. Their father sat quietly at the kitchen table, listening as they talked. Finally, he looked up. You girls been through a lot for your age, he said. But you keep your heads up. People see what they want to see until they can't ignore it anymore. The younger twin smiled gently. You always say that because it's true, he said, and because you need to remember it. That evening, they stayed longer than usual, helping their mother cook dinner, listening to their father's quiet stories about his younger days. For a few hours, life felt normal again. When they drove back later, the city lights shimmered against the dark sky. The older twin glanced at her sister. You think the officer's thinking about it now? Her sister nodded. He has to be. When the bureau showed up, he knew he'd crossed a line. Maybe, the older twin said softly. Or maybe he's still trying to justify it in his head. People like that don't change overnight. Maybe not overnight, her sister agreed. But sometimes one moment can shake everything. They both fell silent again, lost in thought. That night, as they prepared for bed, the older twin checked her phone. A message had come in from their supervisor. It was short. Official statement coming tomorrow. Keep low until then. She put the phone down and looked at her sister. It's starting. Her sister nodded slowly. Then we wait. The next morning, news headlines began appearing across networks and social media. Local officer detains FBI agents during routine stop. The articles didn't focus on the anger or the mistake, but on the calm way the agents had handled the situation. That detail made all the difference. People started talking, not about confrontation, but about composure, professionalism, and the quiet power of staying in control. At the bureau, the supervisor called them again. You two did more good than you realize, he said over the phone. People are seeing what real integrity looks like. That's rare these days. The older twin smiled faintly. We just did what we had to do. He chuckled softly. That's what makes it work. Later that day, the twins sat on their balcony watching the city below. The noise of the day drifted up, then cars, music, laughter, the sounds of ordinary life. You know, the younger twin said quietly. For a moment I thought we'd lose control of everything. Her sister shook her head. We never lost it. We just didn't fight the wrong battle. The younger one smiled. You always know what to say. Her sister looked out toward the horizon. Not always, but today it feels enough. They sat there in silence for a long time, the soft wind brushing against their faces. For once they didn't have to pretend. They didn't have to hide who they were. The world had seen them, not as suspects. Not as victims, but as what they truly were, strong, calm, and quietly unstoppable. The federal agent looked back at the officer. You might want to explain yourself. But the twins didn't stay to listen. One of the other agents approached them. You both okay? He asked softly. The older twin nodded. We're fine. Let's just get this over with. As they were escorted to one of the SUVs, the younger sister glanced back for a brief moment. The officer stood frozen, realization washing over him. That day had started like any other for him, but it was about to change everything he thought he knew.